Hi there, it's the great Adam Griffith here again with Peter Chesbrough. Um, we set out really to look at some feedback on some of our videos and answer some of the questions. We've ended up going on some good tangents.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, really, really good stuff. We have a look at a little bit if um, uh, how Christian Arthur is. Can Arthur be considered a Christian figure, or are the two different Arthurs Christian? What kind of Christianity are we talking about? Which is response to Epic Eric. So cheers for the question, mate.
Yeah.
Um, and we go into a little bit about manuscript, which was sent to me by Monica Escobar to do with Coelbren.
Yeah.
Um,
Coelbren, yeah. Possibility of relation to Phoenician script uh and it's spread across Europe. We've dipped into the migrations as well a little bit. Um and I've got a little tidbit about tin mining and the word Albion. Ooh. Uh,
Maybe.
um, and yeah, as Adam said, lots of tangents.
Yeah, great stuff. And I think we're gonna do these kind of response videos every so often to basically interact with you guys who want to ask certain questions, and we can have the conversations which you want to have. So
Thanks,
enjoy.
guys.
Thanks for watching.
Cheers. Great. Well, yeah, so there's one thing I wanted to mention before we get to feedback, feedback data. We're going to, I, I was watching this little video, a local guy he's got a really cool video uh, channel name. He's called Coelbren, which comes from a Cornish inscribed stone. Um, that is the only reason I picked out his channel. I thought, oh, that guy knows it, so I picked
Yeah,
out that one. And he does little walking videos on Dartmoor, and he was talking about the name of one of our rivers, which is the River Plym. It's got a couple of interpretations, but his favorite, and it makes total sense to me, is it's to do with the tinning in the area and the tin mining. Um, so Plym comes from the hilarious word plum bum. Um, so plum bum is like a Latin shorthand for tin. So I only ever knew the word stan or sten, which is apparently I think it's got Latin origins. So we've got a farm which means tin. We've got a farm locally called Stan Lake Farm. The Stan is literally the tin lake. The lake being an artificial lake, which is used for washing out tin as well. But actually, some of the older Latin words is you have so plumbum negra is lead, and that is why we still use like plomb for lead and plumbing. That's where all these words come from. And tin was plumbum album, which is white lead, or white metal. I don't know how you want to pronounce it. Um, and I thought this was pretty interesting, connecting this idea of whiteness and tin and Britain and whiteness. And the word Albion sprung to mind. Now, Albion doesn't really, it's one of those words where lots of people have different interpretations. I think one of the most popular is the idea of the White Cliffs of Dover. I think that's the most popular one. We kind of like Albine as well in Britain's hidden history for the origin of this world. But it got me thinking of in Greek, the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands. It's sort of a generic term which is used for different islands, but it's definitely applied to northwestern Europe quite a lot, and in reference to Britain. And I wondered if my brain made the connection if Albion in fact is just almost like a Latin rendering of Cassiterides, and the whiteness in reference is just sort of saying it's like a shorthand for tin islands. But yeah, that was just something that crossed my mind the other day. I'm probably completely wrong, but I thought it was
yeah.
interesting.
Wow, yeah, that's very interesting. Great stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we do some feedback.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. You know, we've had some really nice feedback from people, mainly from the sort of Britain's hidden history kind of world. Um, um, so we had Gary Taylor commenting, asking about the Princeps, which was you brought up last time, which is I found really I love that.
Yeah,
And I said,
I think I've got to credit someone on Britain's hidden history for it getting into my head, certainly. But
great. And since we had the conversation, I sent that photo to you. I found a photo with Longshanks, with Llewellyn and Alexander III of Scotland, but Llewellyn is labelled as the Princep of Wales. It's not the Prince of Wales; it's the Princep of Wales, claiming his Roman Emperor lineage in his title, which it just really flips everything on its head, which is a very interesting element.
yeah, did you look at how the Romans use the word princeps?
Yes,
yeah. It is literally the principal person, the leader. It is, emperor by another word. Absolutely.
That's really great element for.
I think someone else pointed out on that image. I thought was interesting that someone was either presenting or holding in front of Llewellyn a red sword.
I didn't see that. I'll have to go back and
I hope my brain didn't just invent that, like it invented Chat Daft. It is a real place.
It's a real place, and we'll
It is a
find
real
it.
place. It's near Feedback Data. It's just around the corner. Promise.
Right.
No, it is real. It is real.
Yeah.
No. Have a look at that. I'm sure there's someone holding a red sword in front of him, which is obviously could have a lot of meaning to it.
Feedback wise, other than that, we've got Mark Manning. What a tangled web we weave ourselves when we deceive. Absolutely. These are the things. These little relics, like the Prince of Wales, which has been inverted. Which when we find things out, it'll eventually shift the picture. For a lot of this stuff. Epic Eric asks a great question: Would have Arthur been Christian? Which is I think really good question for people to explore when looking at this, especially in terms of British Christianity versus Roman Christianity, and with Illstid wanting people in Wales to convert to Roman Catholicism. And
I was just going to say, we're going to turn Eric's simple question, yes and no question, into a very, very complicated answer.
Absolutely, yes, as per this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, sure, the Arthur II would have been British Christian. I'm sure Arthur I would have been British Christian given his timing as well. But what does that Christianity sort of mean? Are we talking Christianity as we recognize it as coming from, Rome, the Catholic version, or is this the British Gnostic version, which is, connected to that apostolic tradition is connected to the Druids and the Essenes and, early Gnostics and everything like that, which is a totally different version and vision.
And it's presented in the mainstream as the insular church. They used to call it the Celtic Church, but even in the mainstream, they're iffy about calling certain things Celtic or not. So insular is generally the word used. Thank you. It seems to be because sorry, the word insular is used because the idea that this church grew up in its own sort of separate environment, which I think is really interesting because when we talk about British archaeology, we pretty much always talk in terms of diffusionism. Everything comes to Britain, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Except our Christianity,
Yeah.
which we are allowed sole claimants of, probably because it doesn't exist anymore. And there seems to be a sort of big question mark, especially from the mainstream's perspective. This is of when it started and when it became this, when it developed its own insular style away from Rome, because for me, unless you see this as something starting much earlier and therefore starting at a time before Roman Christianity has actually become something that we can now recognize today, there is no time for that insular separation and development to happen. You know, this is a time where Rome and Britain would have been, you know, especially after they say it's because of the downfall of the empire, but intelligent, wealthy people would have still been connected across Europe at this period. That's not up for debate. There needs to be a schism from Rome. And that, for me, that schism is when the Roman Church, through the various councils, became something different to what it was when Christianity started at very similar times in Britain and Rome. We can
Yeah.
definitely, you know, there's various people like Cardinal Baronius who claims that, you know, the primacy of the British Church. But you know, there's no doubt there's only going to be a decade in it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for me, to see what we see in the mainstream as the insular church, I think that the British Church needs to be far more ancient than they generally give it credit for, which they say is something that I believe came right at the end of the Roman period. They try and squeeze it in at the end of the 4th century, as far as I know. You know, I could be wrong on that, but you know, that's when they start to see Christian rites in various Roman villas and things like that, especially in the East. Yeah, but I think it's, as we've said before, probably much earlier in the West, and Caerleon was probably a very important place.
Yeah. And we've got the Council of Nicaea in 325, haven't we? Which records of, you know, Welsh bishops going to Rome as fellow respected members of a wider Christian world, which is, yeah, it's very interesting. So being
Oh
that
yeah.
being at the beginning of the early part of the 4th century, before this, you know, before what you're describing, and then things start to become a little bit. We see the church form into what it becomes, which, you know, becomes the type of Christianity which is fought against by Arthur, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's probably worth mentioning Augustine or Austin.
Yeah.
Austin is probably a better name actually, because there's a very easy confusion with Augustine of Hippo, who's from not a too dissimilar period. No, he's a few centuries earlier. I think Augustine of Hippo was, although very interesting, a critic of Pelagius. How do you pronounce his name? Oh God,
Yeah.
I'm going to forget
Pelagius.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pelagius.
Yeah.
So Pelagius as well, if you're interested in British Christianity, look at Pelagius. You know,
Yeah.
I think that gives you a better idea of what British Christians believed. I don't think his ideas I don't think his ideas necessarily originated from him. I think it's part of his teaching and learning, you know, what he learned through the church that is where his ideas came from. But yeah, he's very much, against original sin, and all sorts of things, especially things that Augustine of Hippo came up with. So there's a very
Yeah.
interesting, again, you've got this like Catholic and British Church opposition. But Austin is the St. Augustine of Britain, or England, possibly more correctly, who came in the 7th, 8th century. And I'm not going to get things correct, guys. Just going to get everything wrong. Don't bother criticizing. I already know I'm wrong. Um, so, um, but Augustine is converted the first Anglo-Saxon kings, and this is, if you type in when did Christianity come to Britain, this is, often one of the first things that comes up is Augustine converting English kings, and they don't even talk about all the Romano British.
No, scandalous, isn't it?
It's
Absolutely.
bizarre. It's
Yeah.
so odd. It's sort of even like the Saxon academics just ignore the Roman academics. So it's
Which is a bizarre notion in itself, really. Sometimes, there's a real veneration of the Romans sometimes, isn't there, amongst those sorts of people? But sometimes there isn't. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and Augustine met with British bishops on the Severn. I think I'd quite like to read Churchill's history book, because apparently he goes into great depths about this. I'm not in any way a fan of Churchill, and what he said about writing history means that everything should be taken with a pinch of salt. But
Yeah.
all of that aside, history is history, and I think that's going to be a really useful resource. I'd like to look into that. But Austin met with the British bishops, and I think just told to fuck off, wasn't he? Basically,
Yeah, rightly so. Yeah.
yeah, he was politely declined.
Yeah.
They don't, well, or impolitely declined. And this then became a big enough schism that we could, Wilson and Blackett certainly argue that this is the first crusade. The first Roman Catholic crusade was the Catholics converting the various Saxon and Mercian kingdoms and driving them against the Britons. Wilson and Blackett cite several events where the Saxon victories aren't capturing castles or land or cattle or anything. They're destroying monasteries and executing monks. It's religious war, undoubtedly.
Wow. Yeah. That's
Mm.
fascinating. I find it really interesting what you're saying earlier about the interaction between uh, Welsh ecclesiastics and
Oh yeah,
Roman.
I can't remember where I had that at. So it was really interesting. I think it was something that was. Oh, it might have even been John Fletcher's book. It's called The Western Kingdom, and he's discussing the relationship between the RC and the British church members. That one particular story was of I think it was possibly even a bishop went to visit and stayed at a British monastery, a Saxon bishop, and he was told he couldn't appear in the presence of the British bishops for at least like 3 days or something. He was told he had to be washed. I think he had to take all his garments off and be washed thoroughly before he was allowed in. And even then, for days afterwards, they refused to eat with him in his presence. And I think the point I was making to you is that the only things that they ever really talk about as differences between the British Church and the Roman Catholic Church are the dating of Easter, which is very topical for our little Easter video here.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the dating of Easter and the cut of the tonsure, so how they cut the hair into the and I was saying to Adam that I think this seems like such almost like a euphemism for something else that they didn't want to write, because although I can understand why small things can become very heated in religious debate, it seems like they seem like very small things to well, go to war over, which is what happened. And certainly we can look at, say, the Saxon, John Fletcher's book is specifically about Devon and Cornwall, and the Saxon advance westward was definitely not just military and economical, but also ecclesiastical. You look up anywhere where's the first bishopric of Cornwall, and it will say Maker, and that's just the first Roman Catholic bishopric of Cornwall.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there's writings from 200 years earlier about Cornish bishops. So, there are plenty of Cornish bishops. They would have had a bishopric, they would have had cathedral or, equivalent. But yeah, you can only find. It's interesting though, because Athelstan, the king who put him in place, put a British bishop in place at Maker. So he was obviously very careful about who he chose, and he didn't want to stir the pot too much, I think. However, the Maker Cathedral is dedicated to Saint Germanus, and Germanus is a very interesting figure, actually, and I'd like to know more about him from the Southeast Wales perspective, because Germanus, again, is another Catholic missionary, but he seems to have been so much more successful than Augustine in terms of converting British, or at least because he went to argue against Pelagius and Pelagianism, but doesn't seem to be any record of violence or.
Right.
So and I think he's got cathedral. Well, it's a church now, I believe, dedicated in Maker. And I think he's got one in North Wales and possibly one in South Wales as well.
That's
Worth
something
looking
to
at.
delve into, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Right.
He also Germanus I found interesting because he defended oh God, it was in Brittany. I think it was on his way up to Britain. He stopped the slaughter of a group of prisoners, I think, that were captured in battle. And the reason he stopped it is because they were Christians. Now, obviously, Christians in Brittany.
Yes. Yeah.
What type of Christians are they going to be?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But they're from this group who appears all over the Middle East. Oh God, I wish I was prepared for this. Didn't think about this. Never going to be able to find
this
it.
much of a deep dive, were we?
No,
No,
no.
but this is good. This is good. This is good.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just another interesting sort of relationship where you hear someone's name or you hear a place or something,
Yeah.
and then you look into it, and then suddenly the same sort of people, the same sort of places, the same sort of ideas start to crop up. We've got to do Iberia at some point, northern Spain, and in its relationship to Britain in particular, I think it's very interesting.
Right.
Uh,
That's not something I know too much about.
no, but they it's possibly like a Brutus stopping point. The Iberian script, in fact, a lot of the Paleo-Hispanic scripts have this distinctly Phoenician, Coelbren look to them.
Ah.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
it's very old link. It's not just a early medieval or even Iron Age link. It's a very ancient link.
Right. Okay.
But in Iberia, say Iberia in the Middle Ages, in fact, I think it's worth having a look for John Fletcher. Actually, it's a lot of things I disagree with him on, but he does a lot of good stuff about, especially early medieval Devon and Cornwall. And one thing he was looking at is the quite considerable evidence for Devon and Cornwall expansion into northern Spain in the 5th and 6th centuries. So basically, at a time when all the Britons fleeing.
Yeah,
You
of
know,
course.
oh,
Yeah,
you know, we can't cope because all these Saxons and Irish are turning up.
yeah,
Meanwhile,
yeah,
in Devon and Cornwall, they're going, we're going to sail hundreds of miles away to militarily, capture and secure mining operations in northern Spain and trade points. That's not the actions of a nation that's like
yeah.
worried about keeping its borders. This is
Yes.
this is this is and I was talking to someone about this the other day actually. That's the same sort of period as Reothamus.
Oh,
Reothamus is, Geoffrey Ash's suggestion for Arthur.
Arthur,
But one
yeah.
thing I find interesting about Reothamus is he's a British king, whether he's from Brittany or Britain or whatever, I don't know. But who's asked by the Romans to help with fighting fighting Germans. So at a period again when all the Britons are fleeing desperately from Saxons over to, and going, oh no, we can't cope with all this going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They are being asked by Romans to help fight Teutonic tribes.
Yeah. I could see why. I could see why Jeffrey Ash might think he's Arthur for that kind of reason. But yeah,
Yeah, the European campaign doesn't match up.
yeah, okay.
It's not, and just it's just sort of a bit wishy-washy, I think.
Yeah, there's a few out there that just do not. They don't stand up against the Wilson and Blackett, you know, composition of Arthur 1 and 2. It's just the strength is nowhere near there.
No, but yeah, let's get back to, was Arthur Christian?
Yeah, yeah, okay.
So we said, yes, with a but, basically.
Yeah,
He was a Christian. He wasn't really what we view as a Christian today, and in fact, it's kind of quite hard to define. It's not a lot of evidence, but we can definitely go down, as you say, the Gnostic route, um, uh, possibly Druidic practices, things like this, and as I said, I think Pelagianism is a good way to look at again what sort of dogma was not in the Roman Catholic Church, that was in the British Church. We know that for some reason they hated each other, the Roman Church and the British Church, and they could both claim, and it's probably to do with both claiming primacy. And it probably developed out of the fact that the British Church was very aware that it was started very early on with apostolic roots. We got Paul preaching on St. Paul's Hill in London. There's documents about, I think I was reading in the Yolo manuscripts, it was about Joseph of Arimathea leading a group of disciples, including Philip, Paul, and possibly even Peter as well, to Britain.
yeah.
We have, for those of you who don't know as well, British Apostolic churches are pretty much always dedicated to their founder. I think the one exception which is talked about is churches dedicated to St. Michael, because obviously he's an archangel, he's not a person. However, in Wales in particular, there is a lot of churches dedicated to disciples and various other the apostles, and even Mary as well. And they've held these dedications for a long time. So
I remember in terms of the schism between British and Rome, I was just it's just reminding me of what Lawrence Main the Druid and his view was about the Battle of Camlan, and about his view was that it the old British Christianity, which had reverence for the goddess, versus the new patriarchal kind of spirituality that was coming through, and it was essentially representative of a war between those two
Mm.
primordial energies which occurred in his words on the entrance of the womb of the goddess in the
Mm.
landscape of you know of Wales, in that part of Wales, being attributed to the womb, which is an
I could, the crooked
interesting,
glen.
yeah, the interesting view of that.
Mm. I, I was thinking of Lawrence the other day actually because it was St. Derville's Day, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, I saw
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah. And Lawrence believes to be a reincarnation of Derville, doesn't he?
yeah,
Who sounds like
absolutely.
a fascinating character as well. Derville's not one I'd come across a lot, but
Yeah,
again, fully sort of intertwined in this history. Absolutely fascinating. So was the idea was that Illtyd was bending Arthur's ear
yeah,
towards Catholicism. Yeah. So one thing that strikes me about Arthur when you take into account things like Fortress Glamorgan, um, how he's spoken about, and also like his military, is that I there definitely seems to be a thing with various Welsh kings in us, and any king actually, is ones who are a bit clued in know that if you get someone in good writing about you, you can get them to write lots of really nice things about you that go down in history very well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Arthur also knew that if he taxed the church, he could invest it militarily and he could have an incredibly secure kingdom. And I think Wilson and Blackett talk about how in the lives of the saints, Arthur is not spoken about nicely, generally speaking.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and the issue seems to be that other kings did not tax the church, and Arthur did.
yeah,
uh,
absolutely. Yeah,
so that's very interesting.
yes,
And also the fact that he seemed to implement this this suggestion that he implemented this sort of equestrian sort of standing army, um, and a very clever network of fortifications that took advantage of the landscape. Um, so this strikes me about Arthur. I'm sorry, making a long point to
that's
come round
great.
to
It's
something.
great. Yeah, yeah,
To come round to something
yeah,
is that I think he would have been. He sounds like a pretty damn smart guy, and I think playing off the British Apostolic Church and the Roman Catholic Church against each other probably would have done him a lot more good than necessarily going with one or the other. Especially because he seems to have this relationship with the church. Oh, what's the other thing he does? Is people who go and claim some sort of hide in churches away from Arthur. He still drags them out anyway.
yeah. Yeah,
He's like, I don't care what sanctuary you're claiming. I'm just gonna you murdered someone and you're gonna die,
yeah,
basically. That's another thing. The justice in Arthur's period seems to have been meted out quite a lot by himself as well, which is one of these things that comes through um, history as like an honorable thing to do. Do you know what I mean? Do you see what I mean?
kind of someone to um actuate justice, as someone to take it upon themselves to go and set things right in that
Yeah,
kind
and
of way.
and not
And
yeah, not
yeah,
just asking someone else to do it, especially the dirty work as well,
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
which I
Yeah,
think is very interesting.
that's an
But
interesting point. Yeah,
I'm not sure. Lawrence's experiences are not something that I can comment on at
no,
all because I what he he's physically trained himself. He doesn't use drugs, which is mad in my opinion. He is physically fit. He he sleeps out, from what I can gather, he sleeps out on mountains to try and literally have dreaming experiences of a previous life. And whatever you think about that, it's an an incredible act of physical discipline and mental discipline to do something like that. And it's just sad that in our country we don't have respect for people who put
Yeah,
themselves through these things.
absolutely.
Whereas in India, he'd be a holy man.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
it's
Yeah,
not a question of it. And whatever you think about those words, you know, it doesn't really make a difference. But yeah, I can't comment on that. But I think that's a really interesting idea because at this time, you know, again, this is this period where there's sort of like a bit of a standoff between the British and the Saxons, and seemingly because of Arthur's actions, things actually are held in relative calm throughout the middle of the 6th century politically. And I'm not sure how well big religious change would have been good for that situation. But then obviously he sees it happening towards the end of this period as well, doesn't he?
yeah, absolutely.
And if we're talking about post Comet, that could be a time for religious change. Definitely.
I think change is happening in the landscape at that time.
Yeah.
Would make sense. Yeah.
Great. Have we confused Eric enough?
I think that's great. No, I think you've because I replied to him and I said in short, yes, you know, being from an apostolic background, but you really opened up on that. That's great stuff.
That's the Simpsons quote. Short answer, yes, with an F. Long answer, no, with a but.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which one do you want? Yeah. He when I commented that he replied to me, and you know he's commented about the St Helen and the cult of her in Colchester, which lasted a long time, and he mentioned that the football team in Colchester had a cross on it to represent St Helen of the Cross, which has since been removed and replaced with a Roman-looking eagle. Says Eric.
Oh, right, okay.
Fascinating.
Bizarre. I wonder if
Yeah,
he could just send him a letter and say, you know, do you know have any history about your
yeah,
your logo? And
yeah,
because wasn't there another? I reckon football club images could have some really interesting information on them because some of them are like 100 years old, and
yeah,
even that amount of time, loads has been lost. You know, certain just sort of general day to day, you know, British, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like cultural ideas, memes essentially,
yeah, absolutely.
have been lost since then. And Ross was looking at one and it had something on it. Oh my God, my mind's gone completely blank now. But yeah, that was another. As soon as you said football club logo, that really sparked my memory of some of another football club logo that Ross covered.
Right.
Oh God,
I can't remember that
I
one.
think it had a Welsh It was like a London football team, but it had a Welsh dragon.
Okay.
And the older you went back on their badge, the
Yeah.
more it looked like ones that appeared on Welsh flags, and less like a dragon, essentially.
Ah, right. I'll have to look
Like
that up.
even the
That's
way it's
yeah,
posed, you know, like so much about it was very interesting.
very interesting stuff. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's a great way, actually. You know, football logos, as you say, talking around the 100-year mark, we can see what symbology we can distill out of them.
Mm,
What holds a resonance with understanding of things today. I mean, the only one I can think of at the moment, which is not much to do with what we're talking about, but Arsenal Football Club, with
mm.
being the Arsenal, it's a North London club now. Originally, it was from the Woolwich Arsenal in Southeast London, and it's people have forgotten that. People don't even
Mm.
know that, and that in that time, things have changed. I think
Yeah,
it's still
absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, we could see what symbology is lingering in certain areas of
Mm.
football iconography. Um, I went to Colchester actually.
Yes, you did.
Um,
Yes.
um, in search of a mosaic,
Mm.
which had been uncovered. It was in BBC News, and it was in a place called Lion Walk, essentially, and I couldn't find it. It wasn't there. The tiny little place called Lion Walk wasn't there. I went round and asked all the locals. I went to the library. I went, went to the church and the places where people might be interested in this sort of thing. And they said, "Oh, I've seen it on the TV, but I haven't seen it in real life." So I thought that was interesting. I haven't seen it today, but yeah, I don't know what that was about. But yeah, I would have liked to have gone and seen that. It wasn't a wasted journey because I went to Colchester Castle and we did
Yeah,
some stuff in there. It's great stuff. Got some good photos of some inscriptions and that. So, but we went looking for the chapel of St Helen, which is, as the story goes, burnt down by Boudica.
oh right, okay.
Uh, and sort of rebuilt in Norman times, and they retain the narrative of St Helen and everything like that. But it's a Greek Orthodox church now, and they've got some beautiful artwork in there, you know, sort of St Helen of the Cross, and the cult is still alive in Colchester by the looks of it. And they've got good
Interesting.
statues of St Helen of the Cross there, and
Mm.
yeah, interesting place to go. But shame I didn't get to see the mosaic.
No, no, I know.
Yeah.
We should definitely. I was thinking because on the Sunday night Britain in history, Paul covered a thing about the mosaic was another very British looking mosaic
Ah,
come
yeah.
up recently. Um, that was 5th century, 450s, something like that. 40 years after
Yeah.
the Romans left. Britain's still laying very nice mosaics in their homes and palaces.
Oh, I'd need to have a look at that.
Mm. Yeah,
Wow.
it's on the Sunday night show if you have a skim through and it'll have the dates. But there was one I came across recently in Gloucestershire where there's just remains of a villa in the wood, and you can go into the shed and you can like lift up a tarp, and there's a recreation,
Okay.
great
Yeah.
big bloody swastika on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'm obviously nothing to do with Nazis, it's but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
great big with not work around the edge of it. Um,
Amazing.
and that's in
Amazing.
Gloucestershire. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
classic prime Britain territory, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and I saw something recently as well. Someone was saying you can go to probably in the British Library or something like that. Um, massive books which have basically images of every mosaic that's been dug up and then recovered.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah, huge images, and it would be fantastic to go through them if I had lots of money and lots of time. Um,
Yeah.
go through them, but just and try and see if there are separations between art styles and regions.
Yeah. Great. That'd be a worthy exercise, definitely.
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting because if you can say that Romans in this part of the country were picking these and Romans in this part of the country, or even if we call
Yeah.
them Romano Britons, whatever,
Yeah.
it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to see if, especially across that classic Loygas Cymru border,
Yes.
whether
Yes.
there's differential, between the two. I think that would be really interesting, and period as well. That's another thing to look into.
Marshall Abraham's covered a really good, she did a really good video on a mosaic and covered in, I think it's Cambridgeshire, and
Mm.
it's depicting the Trojan War, and it's, you know,
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
differences in style there between other supposedly Roman mosaics and um, the kind of brashness of the style there. it's just completely different, and it's in the right place for, you know, British Troy and all the rest of it. So what's going on there? I'd love
Yeah.
to know. It's another thing I'd like to look into in the mix of all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to read Where Troy Once Stood, because I do sit on quite a I like with a lot of things. I sit on the fence quite a lot.
I think that's a good place to sit for a while. Right.
Locally, they'd say I had splinters in my ass because I sit on the fence. But
All right. Yeah.
but yeah, that I especially because I've not read his book. I've not read Imam Wilkins' Where Troy Once Stood, but I would love to. I think it's like
Yeah.
35 quid for or 50 quid for a copy of it, something like that. It's not
Right.
very many of them.
No.
There's ideas, there's book about uh like Troy and the Balkans and things like that. But again, it goes into the same things. I thought very similar things. I think that Imam Wilkins does, in as much as they're describing landscapes that are not. Homer describes landscapes that are not uh, accurate for that sort of region of Turkey that Troy is meant to be. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't. I think there's also about the descriptions of like because I think Alan Wilson does this as well in Moses in the Hieroglyphs. I think there's a description of the route the fleet took or something
Right.
um, from Greece, and that sort of geography is sort of all off. Um, and I'm not sure if that's something that Wilkins covers, but I think in this Balkans book they sort of look at it, and as I say, Alan Wilson makes sense of it as a fleet coming from Egypt rather than Greece. Um, sorry, in Trojan War. Yeah, did I say Trojan War? Yeah. So so yeah, Troy is Troy is an interesting one.
Oh
Troy is
yeah.
very important in British history for those of you who don't know because um, it's seen as an origin point for the British foundation story. Brutus, the founder of Britain, uh, is meant to be the grandson or great grandson of
Great
Aeneas,
grandson.
great
Yeah.
grandson of Aeneas of Troy. Um, and uh, we've done Trojan Origins, but I'm going to do it again.
Yeah. Do it again.
As we've talked about this a lot. So one thing that's been very important for people who uh, want to prove the sort of accuracy of British history is the dating of the Trojan War. The dating of the Trojan War is very important for a lot of British scholars for a long time, and uh, it's a minefield. It's a fucking minefield. Um, for one, because there seems to be several people claiming two Trojan Wars, or that at least that the Trojan War story was a story of something much more ancient, and then there was a the more recent Trojan War, which is what we apply all the sort of stuff and ideas to because it's the most recent one in our memory. But even the dating, even if you only believe in one Trojan War, then you've got to argue about the dating of it, and this is very important for then again the arrival of Brutus in Britain. Um, so yeah, so this is why we're talking about the Trojan War,
Absolutely.
basically. And Imam Wilkins, we're talking about a book called Imam Wilkins, Where Troy Once Stood. He places Troy in the Gog Magog Hills in Cambridgeshire. Um, and that's all I can say because I've not read the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't read it either. I'm very interested in it. It's another thing I want to get round to.
Mm.
Uh, haven't got there
Um,
yet, but yeah, fascinating.
and we're
Yeah.
mentioning Marshall Abrams, and Marshall is apparently shortly publishing a book on the Great Migrations as well. So we've covered a little bit about migrations. We've not really done anything on Albine.
No. Yeah.
But if you're interested, definitely have a look for her name. You should
I'll,
probably link
yeah.
link her
I'll link it.
channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't wait to read her book as well. I think that's going to be fantastic. Um, Absolutely brilliant woman. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing more about that. And then once we've read it, we can talk about it more.
It's definitely great stuff. Yeah, I'm and the reason I keep bringing Troy up, it's in my mind prevalently at the minute because of my dissertation and looking at the at the point in the 17th century when we went from our traditional ways of looking at history towards the new one that would become really take off in the 18th century to do with Celts, Anglo-Saxons, these things that have lasted for 300 years, that have covered up a lot of our old history, and how the English Civil War psyche. There was a civil war in terms of history writing as well, and history, how we regard our history, and the Trojan Israelite thing came to the fore very prevalently, which I'm going to cover as well, and we will do a video on that. But
Yeah, there's a number of Cambria triumphants by
yeah,
Percy Enderby. He quite plainly says in his introduction, he's almost sort of like, "What the hell's going on?" All these people saying, they seem to have completely forgotten a history, or at least a willfully ignoring it.
yeah,
And I've done this almost to sort of set the record straight. So he seems to, as you say, pretty much be citing as you say, a war of words
yeah, yeah,
between
great.
historians seems to have gone on, which is not, you know.
Yeah, it's occurred to me that there's a lot of European nations claiming Trojan descent, also claiming relations to the British royals at subsequently and simultaneously, interestingly. But the Trojan thing was strongest in Britain, and it's been the where that story has flourished the
Yeah,
most.
I saw someone talking about Viking claiming Trojan heritage, which is Trojan heritage, which is not something I'd come across before.
Yeah, wow. I know that's incredible. Yeah, I know the French, obviously the Romans did,
Yeah,
obviously
and the Franks,
Rome,
yeah.
the Franks. Um, didn't know about the Vikings. That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, I'll have
Yeah.
a look at I'll see where I found that the other day, yeah.
Right.
Um, which leads us actually to Vikings leads us to runes. Or
Ah,
should we say
those things.
Wales leads us to runes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, are you referring to the manuscript I was
I am
talking
indeed.
about earlier? Well,
Mm.
I put feelers out on the Britain's Hidden History group. For those who know that, I'm looking into Coelbren. My dad, especially, has done a lot of work in Coelbren. I remember that Wilson and Blackett mentioned, I think it's in King Arthur Conspiracy, that there is a manuscript in the Bodleian Library recording all of the old ciphers, which are presented later in the 18th century by Yola McGannog, who's accused of forging them. Well, he couldn't have forged them because we've got, our older manuscripts. We've got Ian Llawddyn in the 15th century describing the cipher. I think there's someone saying that during the Owen Glendower uprising, Coelbren came back in a way which was so the alphabet was utilized by folks who are in the know about it to communicate messages which couldn't be read by the English,
Mm.
which is interesting. Something I need to look into. So Monica came back to me with my question. She sent me a manuscript dated not to the 15th century, even though there is a date for the 15th century because the manuscript was bound and presented to the library
Yeah.
then,
Mm.
but it's actually dated to 850 by a guy called Venus, who I think could be Nennius.
Oh yeah, bloody
Could be
hell.
Nennius, could be. I don't know if it is. I'll have to look into that as well. But
That
um,
would be
yeah,
interesting, wouldn't it?
oh, definitely, definitely. Um, and I'll throw up a photo of it.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, great.
but the the ciphers, they partially resemble to me the same kind of ciphers as Coelbren. There are some differences. The accusation is, as per academic orthodoxy, that this Welsh monk was assimilating and kind of re-representing, borrowing from the Anglo-Saxons of their runes and everything, which I'm not sure a Welsh monk would want to do that really, but that's the accusation by academics. There's another guy, professor of Celtic at Cambridge, who was arguing that it might be actually a mixture of that and looking to Ireland at Ogham. That's where the inspiration comes from. As per academic orthodoxy, the accusation is that the Welsh are not clever enough to invent their own alphabet or have their own culture or anything like that. So, which is an issue, of course. So, yeah, the alphabet, which I'll throw up, it's got a clear R when in there, which is great.
Yes,
Love that.
yeah.
It actually, I measured, I offered it up to the Phoenician script, and it's very, there's a lot of similarities there as well. And it's really not unlike Coelbren. It's really not. There's a millennia in between Nem Venus and Yolomagano, but
absolutely.
There's a millennium between them, but the resonance between them, it's you can kind of allow some slight differences, in my opinion. We're talking about a straight stroke system, which I think we need to, think the assessment of how these strokes are read is something which is unfolding all the time, actually. And I think there are hard and fast rules. I think Colin McGonagall actually got it right in terms of being able to read it, but I think there's been very, very many different interpretations of Coelbren during or the Welsh alphabet throughout the ages.
Yes,
yeah.
So I was just going to say, in my sort of general investigations, so in the Bardas, for instance, there's a lot of manuscripts that talk about the development of Coelbren.
Okay.
And they talk about how initially there were 5 letters, and then they added more and they added more, and each of the ciphers is kind of slightly different. And I think also Wilson and Blackett talk about how certain compound sounds as well developed bigger letters where they seem to, when they're mashing sort of 2 letters together and things like that. So this, and also, this is not at any point in history been a standardized language. So to be able to say that is the alphabet is,
I know what you're saying. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Here's the, I'm going to throw it up now.
Great.
Cool. Can you see?
I cannot see an image. Just says you're sharing it.
Oh, right.
Well, I'll take your word for it. It's just if everyone else can see it, that's the main thing.
Oh, my screen is frozen, so. Oh, dear.
Well, anyway, I mean, there was another thing I was going to say about the Coelbren. Anglo-Saxon runes. This is to say it's a British priest having a go at Anglo-Saxon runes, but they don't even really know what Anglo-Saxon runes are or mean or originate from. There's a lot of ifs and buts and various items which have, so say, Anglo-Saxon runes on them are often still untranslated. They don't know what they mean. I've also seen a few of them where it's sort of like they say it's an Anglo-Saxon runes, but the object is found in like a 6th century British context.
Yeah, sure.
And they're like, oh, look at this Anglo-Saxon ring, and you're like, well, hold on a minute. It was found in the southwest of Scotland in the 6th century. Like that doesn't. Why is it Anglo-Saxon? Here we go.
Yeah, you got it. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Think I know. Are you talking about the that massive cross?
I think it was a ring one I saw,
Oh,
but there
ring.
could be
Sorry.
there
Yeah,
could be I wouldn't be surprised. I've seen a few things where I've gone sort of like, well, is the provenance of that, uh, what, is it just assumed to be Saxon because it's post-Roman and pre-Norman?
yeah, yeah. I'd say that's the formula. That is the
Mm,
formula. Yeah.
yeah.
There's no transitory period where you've got a independent British system at all. So yeah, but as I was saying, can you see my cursor?
Yeah, yeah.
See,
There he
we've
is.
got Arwen there. Great. We've got 9th century Arwen. Yolo didn't
Hmm.
make it up. Um, this one definitely occurs with Yolo. Um, as does this Z looking one here.
Yeah,
As does this occurs with Yolo as well.
yeah.
This one can you see this sort of shape here
Oh,
with
right. Yeah, if you take that off.
take that off, it's got that, which is interesting.
Yeah,
Which is I've shown um in reverse is it looks a little bit like the what is a kind of I think ambiguously and playfully represented as the R's on the Grutner stone,
yeah,
uh, which sort of resemble kind of Phoenician to me. Um, this one is represented by Coelbren. You know, this one is that's I've seen that in
yeah.
Phoenician. That one is I've seen in Phoenician as well. But we are talking about a
That looks
straight
like a
stone.
hieroglyph as well, that one. I've seen that on quite a
Ah,
few things. Don't you think it looks
yeah.
like that plough-shaped one? Have you seen that?
Can't
Sort of
can't recall it.
almost like a well, it looks just like that, but it's yeah, it's sort of like a plough or something like that.
Right, I'll have to look at that. That's interesting.
So talking of, again, going back to Scandinavian runes,
Yeah.
have you seen this news story about the earliest rendering of the name Odin?
Oh,
I think it's Odin anyway. I'm pretty sure it's Odin, but they found so that you get these sort of medallions,
yeah.
which are found all over. That you do get them in Britain, but they're found all over. They're pretty certain they're Saxon because you find them all over northern Germany and Denmark. They got way more of them there than we do. The funny thing is about them is that they look like British Iron Age coins, like in terms of the style.
Yeah.
Like really a lot. I certainly think so. Um, and a lot of them have runic lettering on. And what was interesting is they said, this is there's this one they've claimed this the earliest inscription of the name Odin. And I was looking, and I went through like three Nordic ciphers looking for some of the runes, and I couldn't find some of them.
Really.
And the ones I couldn't find were ones I was particularly looking for because they looked like certain Coelbren characters to me.
Ah,
But I mean, these are
yes.
very, as I say, these artifacts are definitely found in this sort of Germanic context.
Yeah.
But then we were talking the other day about that Tolkien speech, and where he said this almost in a way this Germanic British um, opposition is um, is a fallacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you think about these coastlines between Eastern Britain and Scandinavia have a shared history that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Um, People have been traveling backwards and forwards in the same way that the Cornish have a relationship. Well, maybe not the same way that the Cornish have a relationship with the Bretons, because that that could be more directly political.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
But
see.
but
Yeah.
still, in terms of like sometimes coast communities have way more in common with an opposite coast than they do with anyone 5 miles inland.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And I think Ross made the point once of how many British kings and queens, or sons and daughters of British kings and queens, would have gone across the North Sea to live the rest of their lives. And he made the point that we don't know what necessarily set Danes coming over to Britain in the first place. There's always talk about they wanted more land and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah,
if?
yeah,
Well, actually, my great granddad was the king of that area.
yeah. That's
Seems
right.
like a bit of a mess over there now. It's my land. We're going over. And I
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to illustrate on that point as well that there's a deeper underlying kinship between the Danite, the tribe of
mm,
Dan, and the Danites and the tribe of Dan in Britain as well,
yeah, absolutely.
which is interesting. An interesting element to that underlying all of it. Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's an interest when we're talking about new histories and things. Words like Viking and Anglo-Saxon are not necessarily how they were not used words used by medieval chroniclers, anyone basically before 1700. Viking might have some uh, proper origin in Scandinavia, but in terms of how we refer to these people in
Oh,
Britain.
yeah,
So if you for yourself want to go back and try and understand who certain people are and were and how they relate to, Dane is a word you've got to look for in terms of Vikings.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Absolutely. Mm.
and Viking is not really a helpful word, and Anglo-Saxon is not helpful. In fact, in a British sense, Saxon is basically the only word you need because they just seem to lump them all together.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
yeah,
mean, maybe it's only as helpful as the word Celt in actually trying to
yeah, yeah.
understand
I
who these
agree. Yeah,
people were.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like Jutes. Well, Jutes. We don't even call them Anglo-Jute Saxons. We just, the Jutes just get completely, bugger off. We don't care about you anymore. But this is a whole different, all intents and purposes, a different people. Um, so, and they certainly weren't as busy mates with the Saxons down in the southeast, were they? Because
No, no.
these are competing nations. Like, um, so I mean, they talk about the heptarchy or whatever it is, but this isn't until much later on. These are people who are elbowing their way into the country, and they're quite happy to stand on each other on the way in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know that they are presented as kinsmen in this kind of fashioning
Yeah,
of a Germanic, a homogenous Germanic kind of
yeah,
coming together of the families
yeah.
back
And the
together
British are all
type thing.
separate tribes.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. So
It's
I know.
madness.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's it's the 19th century imperial propaganda machine as well that's contributed to that kind of view.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, and I think it's just worth just as I say, it's just worth mentioning that our understanding of British history that's sort of taught to us generally and referred to is something that's come out of the last couple of hundred years. And if you yourself want to look into it, you need to take on a different mindset and try and understand a different way of thinking because they didn't look at history in the same way we do now, and it was created in a very what we how we look at it was created in a created in a very short period of time. um and although it might seem like the scientific or way of looking at it, it's not. It's in fact it's a way of abstracting it from the history, and for me, I feel
absolutely.
like these words actually detract from being able to understand the history properly. Um, so yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
yeah, yeah. The linear the kind of insistent linearity of trying to understand history is really problematic because you know, and this is why the Welsh weren't as always hot on dates as a
Mm,
bardic culture and a bardic nation who told stories as you would tell a story. You're not going to
mm.
sit there with dates and all the rest of it. Yeah, that's another thing that they hit Jeffrey of Monmouth with. I know.
Oh yeah, yeah. This
It's that.
I just remembered me other news. Sorry. Just because when we were you reminded me just now when we were talking about Romans to Normans.
Right.
Did you see a cemetery was found in Elmet in Yorkshire?
Oh, no way, really?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Listen to this is what the local county archaeologist said.
Uh,
Said it's a Roman cemetery that was used right up till the end of the occupation, right? He then says, then there was a Saxon cemetery there, and he wondered if there was any evidence of crossover. So we have 410 AD when the Romans left. We have
yeah,
something like I think it's something like 850. Elmet was independent until, obviously
yeah.
Saxons.
Oh, yeah, really late. Yeah,
Yeah, really quite late. Yeah, well
yeah.
into the 8th century. If it's not 750, I think it was 850. It was definitely in the middle of a century. Can't remember which one, but as I say, I'm always wrong, so it doesn't matter. Um, right until 850. So we've got 400 years between any
Yes,
Romans being there and any Saxons being there, and the local county archaeologist is wondering if there's crossover between the two.
but that's ridiculous. They don't know their own history. They don't know what Elmet. You don't know what Elmet is. It's Brythonic kingdom. It's incredible.
I was absolutely baffled. That, yeah, absolutely amazing. But
That's
as you
really
said
interesting.
earlier, if it ain't Roman and it ain't Norman, it must be Anglo-Saxon.
Anglo-Saxon. Yeah.